Hello and welcome to another episode of What Happened Here. And today we're in Ballyboro, and this land was once part of the Castleboro domain, and indeed the Palladian mansion that was built by the Carews is just across the river over here. Now that mansion has of course its own unique place in history and its own story to tell. But we're here today to look at another building in the area that has far deeper layers of history. This is the Gaelic Tower House of Ballyboro, and during the reign of King James between 1603 and 1625, these lands here belonged to Walter Butler of Kilclash. Walter was the 11th Earl of Ormond, and after Walter's time the lands passed to James Butler of Tinnahinch. In the Civil Survey of 1654, James Butler, Irish Papist, is listed as owner. Now James was the son of Edmund Butler, who was the second Viscount Mountgarrett, and he was also great uncle to the first Duke of Ormond, who would go on to be Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. James's cousin Pierce Butler owned the land east of the borough and included the town's lands of Cortacuddy, Ballyhighland, Clahaden, Moneyhore, just to name a few, and his seat would have been in Wilton. Under the Cromwellian Act of Settlement, James forfeited the Tower House here in Ballyboro, and in 1668 it was granted to William Lee. In 1669 Lee sold the Tower House and the land to Robert Carew, and it was here that the Carews spent their first time in this area, and they remained here until late in the 18th century when the Palladian mansion was built across the river. But what makes this building uniquely interesting is that it has a direct link to one of the most pivotal events in Irish history. The Williamite Jacobite Wars between 1689 and 1691 were fought between the Catholic King James II and his Protestant son-in-law William of Orange. James had fled Ireland in 1688, only to return the following year to reclaim his throne. Though largely supported by the overwhelmingly Catholic population, James lacked the necessary funds to prosecute a war. At the time, his war funds were costing in the region of £100,000 per month. In an act of desperation, James issued an emergency coinage in order to pay his troops. This was essentially a token coinage made from base metal, which was to be exchanged for silver and gold once the war had been won and James reinstated as king. Brass and scrap metal from objects such as church bells and old cannon was melted down for the production, as were some guns, which is how it earned its nickname, gun money. William of Orange was victorious at the Battle of the Boyne in 1690. James fled the battle and headed for Duncannon in order to escape to France. On his journey he stopped in Enniscorthy and visited the house of Francis Randall. Francis Randall was an ex-Cromwellian soldier who had returned to Ireland in order to found the Society of Friends, or what is commonly known as the Quakers. In his narrative, Randall says that he met the king and gave him refreshments, and his son provided him with fresh horses so they could continue their journey to Duncannon. But what has this got to do with the Tower House here in Ballyboro? Well, also in his narrative, Randall states that a pair of gold cufflinks are preserved at Castleboro, whose ancestor had met James and assisted him at Ochnagopal. It was always in local folklore that James had crossed at Ochnagopal, but very hard substantiated without any solid primary evidence. However, there's one more twist to this story. In the early 1960s, local man Martin Byrne from Ballymackesy was digging ground at the back of his house in preparation for that year's potato crop when he noticed something unusual in the soil. And when he bent down to pick it up, it was this: a half-crown of gun money issued by King James II in 1690. So when we put all of these pieces of the puzzle together, it's reasonable to assume that Ballyboro Castle here was one of the last places that James stayed before he left Ireland forever.